Hi, in this lecture, I'm going to conclude our examination of the Confucian text, The Great Learning. In the previous lectures, I surveyed steps 1 through 4 of the 5-step process for self-cultivation as presented in The Great Learning and as interpreted by Zhu Xi. To review those first 4 steps, it's helpful to look at a passage written by Zhu Xi elsewhere. In this passage, Zhu Xi says, quote, extending knowledge, reverential attention, and overcoming the self. If we compare these 3 tasks to a home, then we get some comparisons. So, recall some of this language from the previous lectures. So he says, first, reverential attention, which is roughly equivalent to step 3 of the Great Learning, which is to make one's thoughts sincere. He says that is like, quote, the person who guards the gates and doors. That is to say, in having reverential attention or having sincere thoughts, one focuses one's attention on what is good, and that prevents bad things from happening to yourself. Zhu continues, he says, overcoming the self is the act of warding off thieves. Recall, overcoming the self is equivalent to step 4 of the Great Learning, which says to correct one's mind, and correct one's mind specifically insofar as you are supposed to ward off selfish desires. So the thieves being warded off in this metaphor are equivalent to the selfish desires that you're supposed to ward off from the self. Finally, Zhu says that extending knowledge is thoroughly investigating affairs in and outside one's home. Now, technically, extending knowledge is really the second step. And the first step is to get a hold of things. But his description of this suggests that steps 1 and 2 go together, as I've indicated previously. So, extending knowledge amounts to studying books, studying what the sages said about what is the correct way to live, and to study the pattern in those things that the sages did, study pattern in various historical examples, and then you're supposed to extend that in your own life by reflecting on yourself, encouraging the moral sprouts within you to grow. And so, what he says here is that we thoroughly investigate affairs in and outside one's home. So investigating affairs would be equivalent to studying pattern, that metaphysical principle. And we're doing it both in and outside one's home, in and outside one's self. So you study it outside the self by reading what others had to say, by reading historical examples, and by also paying attention to just others in your life. And then you investigate affairs, investigate pattern inside yourself by reflecting on those spontaneous, immediate moral reactions and how they are provoked by certain situations, and then trying to take joy in having those morally good reactions. And the aim there is to extend these morally good reactions to other situations such that you have a settled disposition for being virtuous. So those are steps 1 through 4, and what they're supposed to lead to is a cultivated self. And so that's step 5. Now, the text of the Great Learning itself doesn't say so much about what self-cultivation consists in, but we can look at a few other passages to get an understanding of it. So in one place, Zhu says, quote, if one can fully cultivate this qi, this psychophysical stuff that makes up oneself, then one's qi will harmonize with and be assisted by the way and righteousness, end quote. So the basic idea there, recall, is that Zhu is a dualist. He says 2 kinds of things exist, psychophysical stuff, or qi, and pattern, this metaphysical principle that explains what the morally correct way to live is. And so what you do in becoming self-cultivated is have your psychophysical stuff be in line with the right way to live. And so this will involve changing your body and mind appropriately. So you change your psychological and psychophysical responses to various things that occur in the world so that you act morally in any given situation. So you might think here about an example, like you might have always been someone that's very hot-headed, having a great temper, and that's something that you're sort of born with. That's something that's part of your chi. By engaging in that process of self-cultivation, you change that temper, you change your chi so that it isn't reacting in ways that are not in accordance with the way. And you actually get rid of that temper. So one helpful notion here is the notion of harmony, that you harmonize what's distinctive to you, the psychophysical stuff or chi, with the metaphysical pattern or principle that governs everything that exists. So this is indicated already in the Mengzi, where Mengzi says, quote, "To fathom one's mind is to know one's nature. To know one's nature is to know heaven." So to really get deep down inside of one's own mind is going to be equivalent to understanding heaven, understanding the ultimate principles that explain how the world is and how the world should be. So what does this amount to? Well, it amounts to cultivating the 4 moral sprouts so that they become the full-fledged virtues, and that will result in having what we can call a harmony of inner and outer. You harmonize what's inside of you. Those moral sprouts are grown so that they harmonize with the ultimate pattern or principle that governs the universe. Now that we see what self-cultivation is, it's helpful to categorize things a little bit differently. As we saw previously, steps 1 and 2 go together, steps 3 and 4 go together, and you find in Zhu Xi's text different labels for steps 1 and 2 taken together, different labels for steps 3 and 4 taken together. And so steps 1 and 2 get a handle on things and extend knowledge. Those taken together amount to something like exhaustive investigation or exhaustive investigation of pattern. And every once in a while, he'll just say extending knowledge as well as just a label for steps 1 and 2 taken together. Now, steps 3 and 4, generally he'll describe as strenuous effort. Those steps are where you need to put great work into things. And so he'll call that strenuous effort. He'll also sometimes talk about it in terms of accumulating righteousness as well as maintaining reverence or using reverential attention. So you do need to engage in study on the one hand with steps 1 and 2, and then use that study and engage in great efforts to improve yourself with steps 3 and 4. And then the result of all that is that you preserve one's mind and one's good character, and that will be becoming self-cultivated. Let us now consider how the different steps in the Great Learning relate to one another. Now, both the Great Learning itself, as well as Zhu Xi's interpretation of it, suggest going in a temporal sequence. First, you get a handle on things, and once you've completed that, you then extend knowledge, and then once you complete that, then you keep going. Now, although that is roughly what Zhu Xi thinks should be done, he does make some qualifications and suggests that it might not be so simple. So, first, he says at one place, in terms of order, the extension of knowledge comes first, where extension of knowledge is roughly steps 1 and 2 together. Then he goes on, in terms of importance, exerting strenuous effort is the most important. Now, exerting strenuous effort is roughly steps 3 and 4 taken together. So what he's saying there is, yeah, you do need to do steps 1 and 2 first, then you need to do steps 3 and 4, But steps 3 and 4 are what are most important, what you should spend most time on, perhaps. Now, there's another passage in which he gives the two tasks of exhaustive investigation, again, roughly equivalent to steps 1 and 2, and then accumulating righteousness, again, roughly equivalent to steps 3 and 4. And he says that exhaustive investigation is first, but there's not a clear dividing line between that and steps 3 and 4. So this suggests that it's not quite that you do one, fully complete it, and then move on. Rather, there's some overlap. And we get an even further claim when he says, quote, the spiritual task of the learner consists of 2 activities, maintaining reverence and exhaustively investigating. These 2 activities are mutually reinforcing. So once again, we get paraphrases of the different steps. Steps 1 and 2 are exhaustively investigating. Steps 3 and 4 are maintaining reverence, and that these things support each other. So we see that the ordering of the task is not so straightforward, but roughly Zhu thinks that we do go in a particular order, and that's going to contrast with a later philosopher, Wang Yangming, that we'll look at in a future lecture. Let us conclude by considering how we could apply something like the Great Learning to a more modern context. So this is going to be interpreting the Great Learning very, very loosely to talk about a particular example. The example of trying to give up smoking, so trying to give up a bad habit. And we might use other examples, but I think this one's helpful. So if we go in order of the Great Learning, first we have investigation, and this would amount to learning about various health effects that are caused by smoking, the various negative effects, maybe some positive ones you consider as well. And then you're also going to learn about various methods that others have used to give up smoking. So that first step is looking outward, then you turn to extension of that knowledge by going inward and applying that knowledge that you've acquired to your own situation. What methods will work? What health effects are most relevant in your particular situation? So that's steps 1 and 2. You engage in this intellectual investigation, and then you proceed in steps 3 and 4 to actually put it into practice and exert effort. So first, you become sincere, and this is by paying attention to your own thoughts and trying to identify rationalizations. For smoking, you might give a rationalization, I'll just have one more cigarette, or I'm really stressed right now, so I'll just have one cigarette, it'll be a freebie. This sort of thing isn't a rationalization, because if you're genuinely addicted, it's not going to be just one. So you need to be able to be conscious of those rationalizations, conscious of these forms of self-deception. But then, not just being conscious of those rationalizations, you need to correct for them. So that leads to step 4, correcting one's mind. So this will amount to getting rid of the various motives and feelings that prompt those rationalizations. So you're feeling very stressed out and you want to just have one cigarette. Well, try to do things to overcome that temptation, overcome that feeling. So this might involve getting rid of the anxiety that's prompting you to smoke, soothing the mind by doing other things, maybe having some chamomile tea or something like that, although that's not, in my personal experience, all that effective, but there you go. It'll also involve trying to take different perspectives on smoking. So you try to get rid of the fondness that you have for smoking by trying to view it as something disgusting, by really focusing on the negative aspects and overemphasizing them for yourself. That will change your perspective on the smoking and help you see it for what it is. So you use a bunch of things like this, and then the result is self-cultivation, where you have this settled disposition of not smoking. So that's just one example. I hope it's helpful for you to think through how you might apply this in your own life.